South Africa reported a record number of coronavirus cases in a single day, driven by a new infection variant, which has already been found in the UK. The country logged more than 14,000 cases, its highest total of the pandemic so far, while deaths topped 400 for the first time since August the 5th. Dr. Ziweli Mkhize, South African Minister of Health, warns that the virus is now spreading exponentially and new lockdown measures might have to be brought in. Eight countries have banned travelers from South Africa to try and contain the spread of the new strain, including the UK, Germany, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey. The head of Africa's Center for Disease Control, Dr. John Nkengasong, says the new variant accounts for the vast majority of the second wave in South Africa because of the speed in which it can pass from one person, adding that social distancing measures and testing will prevent the need for travel restrictions across the continent.
In terms of how dangerous this virus is, this is what we know about the virus so far. It transmits quickly. That is why it's actually responsible for a vast majority of the second wave in South Africa. The viral loads are higher that is the burden of virus in an infected individual is higher amongst people that are infected with this variant. And we still don't know if it correlates with severe disease or not. Higher viral loads doesn't necessarily mean that it translates to severe disease, but it's a correlate that it could potentially lead to severe disease. So that's what we know about the virus. What we don't know about the virus is whether it has an effect on diagnostics, and we don't believe so, because if it had an effect on diagnostics, it wouldn't have been picked up in the first place. So that is one. Second is whether it would have an effect on vaccine development and efficacy. And because the vaccine are developed using the entire protein, spike proteins, and this is just a mutation, we have to look at the conformational structure of the protein, the overall protein, and not just those specific mutations. However, it is worthwhile insisting that research would guide us in future as to what this means, because there are several mutations there.
The prevailing coronavirus pandemic has put a hamper on Christmas activities across the country, as Nigerians who are still dealing with economic and social impact of the initial lockdown begin to brace themselves for a second wave. At the Presidential Task Force briefing on COVID-19 of Nigerian Center for Disease, DG of Nigerian Center for Disease, I should say, Chike Ihekweazu, reacted to the recent news of a new variant that has been discovered in Nigeria.
If we have new strains of the virus circulating in the UK and Nigeria, we haven't found that strain. But also, it's not something we have been looking for on the go. To find new strains, you have to sequence. And you have to sequence a certain number of viruses longitudinally over time. It's a lot of work to sequence viruses. It doesn't change the diagnosis, it doesn't change the public health management. So our focus has not been on sequencing. So we've sequenced some viruses in the past. We haven't found it. It's where we found the two that are similar, but are not the same. So what we're now doing is sequencing a random selection of those we've collected already to see whether that strain is circulating.
Very unusual Christmas. A lot of the dailies have been calling it this morning. I'm not sure in living memory we've ever had any Christmas like this one.
From Jerusalem to Lagos, Christmas has been either scaled back or has been cancelled. The Pope having to give his message earlier than normal to a scanty audience yesterday. In Australia, it was the same thing. Pastors, clergymen having to beat lockdown measures, leading by example. In Lagos State yesterday, the governor announced that all crossover services must be cancelled in Lagos State and some other states across the country. It's very unusual. And yesterday, just to say, there was a bit of confusion as, some papers were reporting that a second variant had been discovered in Nigeria, according to the Africa CDC. But as we now know, it's a clarification that it was the same variant that was discovered in Osun, Ede, by
Redeemers University
by Professor Happy and his team, which Dr. Ihekweazu spoke about on the show yesterday. Yes, it's a similar one. It's not the exact one found in the UK or South Africa in other parts of the world. It seems to be more, just to allay the fears, there's nothing severe. It's just that it's more transmissible. But what that means is that more people are likely to get it. And if more people are getting it, then there's more pressure on the healthcare system. As we are seeing, we are having increased numbers. But Dr. Iheko has also said yesterday that we cannot, connect the numbers to a new variant. It cannot just be a new variant that's causing the numbers. It has to be people dropping the ball. Nobody is, adhering to safety protocols for COVID-19. So we all have a part to play. It's an unusual Christmas, what we have. But the earlier, the quicker we understand that we need to take these measures, especially the non-pharmaceutical measures. They are so simple, so simple. Yes, it can be expensive for some people when you look at conditions of sanitation, such as providing water and soap, which unfortunately can be expensive for some people who don't have access to running water, who cannot afford sanitizers or even soap. But it's the sacrifice we have to make so that we can get this virus over and done with. Because the longer the virus stays, unfortunately, the more it will, mutate. And we do not know what the next mutation would be like.
And let's beat you before it mutates. Dr.
Exactly.
Well, yesterday we had Dr. Chikwe Iheko of the Nigeria Center for Disease Control on this program. And one of the issues that he has addressed is this new variant, this mutant of COVID-19 that has been discovered in South Africa and also in the United Kingdom. And you'll recall that we're told that the South African variant has also been observed in the United Kingdom. But Dr. Eken Song, the Director General of the African Centers for Disease Control, was the first person, and it was shown in that video, to say that the strain of the virus that has now been found in Nigeria as the mutant variant is not exactly the same type as the one in South Africa and the one in the United Kingdom. In other words, the way he puts it is that they are not of the same lineage. Yes. And what Dr. Iheko did later today at the Presidential Task Force briefing is to offer further clarifications, to say that indeed it's not what they have in South Africa and the United Kingdom that we have here. And that will help to allay anxiety, because a lot of people have become very anxious in the face of a second wave and then the report of a new variant in a country where people are not, in fact, respecting the non-pharmaceutical guidelines. So I think that the reassurance by Dr. Iheko is very useful. He, in fact, having made a point on the morning show yesterday, that it's in the nature of a virus to mutate, yes, so that the virus is not doing anything unusual, but it's for science to follow it. And they have set up a team, again, to work with Professor Happy and Ifeanyi Ebo, the two scientists at the Redeemers University Genomics Center, who, in fact, had reported as far back as August that we had already a mutant variant of the virus in Nigeria. And if that had not impacted negatively on the populace, then, of course, we can be truly reassured. However, the additional step that government has taken and that the task force has taken is what is more important. They've now said, look, anybody coming from the UK or South Africa must subject themselves to the protocol of making sure that they are tested within 7 days. If by 10 days they do not take the PCR test, there are now very strict penalties. Your passport could be delisted, so to speak. Your passport numbers could be published. In fact, we're told that some 100 passport numbers will be published to show persons who have been violating the guidelines. We have also been told that visas can also be cancelled. And then the Nigeria International Travel Portal can also monitor whether you are submitting the authentic PCR test or not, because there have been reports of a lot of fakery. So this vigilance, this newfound vigilance, I think is very important. And the sanctions that have been prescribed are perfectly in order. Yes, COVID and Christmas, where some people have been opportunistic. Airfares have gone up, transport fares have gone up, and the cost of goods and services have gone up opportunistically.
Better late than never, I should say. That's all on news headlines. Take a short break now. When we return, we'll have Adikfemi Akisoya, Adesu Omarwa, Aaron Akerjola, and the team to talk about every activity, sporting activity, COVID, and everything around this on a Christmas day. Welcome back to the Morning Show right here on the Rise News channel. When Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari ordered the reopening of its land borders, it ended the 16-month closure that hiked food prices and stalled trade. It was a move that should mean a smoother adoption of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement and the easing of financial pressures on many Nigerians who depend on trade in the region. But many at the border say the situation on ground hasn't changed much, if at all, I should say. Rise correspondent Akifemi Adesanya was at Seme, along Nigeria's southwestern border with the Republic of Benin, and she sent in this report.
Nigeria has reopened 4 of its borders after a 16-month closure. Here is the Seme border between Nigeria and the Republic of Benin. First and foremost, that should ensure one thing: the freedom of movement of people and goods. At the port of entry and exit, Nigerian Immigration Service officers are allowing travellers with valid identification to pass. Port health authorities are also on ground, checking temperatures and sanitising hands in compliance with COVID-19 protocols. But there have been complaints the situation at the border doesn't actually constitute a reopening. Despite the Seme border being open 24 hours a day, there are still restrictions. Vehicles are not yet permitted to move across either end. This abandoned coach was on its way from Nigeria to Benin Republic when the gates closed in August 2019, and it's been here ever since. So for those in the business of transporting passengers cross-border, the reopening hasn't helped business much.
It's affecting my business because if I don't go with my car, some of customers, they don't like to trek. Some would like to be inside the car. Some would like to trek, but like me personally, I make a drop. So they can charter me from Lagos to Cotonou or from Cotonou to Lagos. So if the border is not open, I will pass. I cannot get a way to pass. But the work itself will not suit me, because if I can't get a passenger to border and the passenger will say, it's border, you drop me, the money will not go up. But if it's international, I can make a profit of it. But I also pray that they should allow the border to be day free, so that because we are in all Africa.
Back across the Nigerian side of the border, there's a market close by. The border closure brought this once thriving community to a shadow of its former self. Strained supply helped push Nigeria's inflation to the highest level in 3 years. Food inflation rose by 18% in November alone.
When border was closed, we experienced very hardship, because there is no movement of people that will come out from Benin Republic to patronize us. So there is bad markets, and also the market was also cost. There's no money for people to purchase it. When border was closed, there was a many task force or many policemen along the road, so there was no entrance, no movement.
And further into the tail end of 2020, those high prices have forced many traders out of business. This poultry trader is the only one left in this section of the market. And after losing this customer, he isn't optimistic about the near future of his stall.
Everybody there before the closing border, they say, wait. She said the season exchange of money don't cost. You don't make all these people there, all this along the shop, nobody there, all of them they're there outside because of the money no day. Some don't travel, some don't go village back because no market for this our go market. Would they say because by grace of God you still the trash this morning now. Only one customer I sell for you. But if they tell the price, they go say 2 costs. Exchange of money, it don't be 900 to 1,000 naira. How do you sell the market? We buy market 4,000 before. They sell 8,000 for Benin. To across and come another country, it will cost. The open border is a good news, man. All the one we don't lose now, we don't know which day we go recover. If the money no come down, what the minister say the open border? Rice don't cost, rural don't cost. I want to say make it there, make everything it dey down. Make it will get peace of mind.
If high food prices weren't doing enough damage, paying off custom officers at several checkpoints close by is also taking a toll on these traders.
And custom they give big problem for road. If you custom talk today say You know, any market no one go. Any market no one go. I mean, at the point with that, this market is spoil. If they say today, they say today, no road, the market will spoil. And the point with that, make it look that thing for us.
More frontiers will reopen on December 31st. And while bans on imports, including rice and poultry, will remain indefinitely, questions continue to be raised on who the winners and losers are. Adefemi Akinsanya, Arise News, Seme, along the Nigeria-Benin border.
All right, Adefemi Akinsanya joins us now for a chat on the Seme border. I mean, Femi, I must have to say that that's a wonderful, wonderful documentary. I'm looking out at the award season next year. That should definitely do very well on the award season, I should say. But what was your experience on ground? I was quite shocked. Take, for instance, let's start with the story of that bus that was about to pass through the border and the gates were shut. What happened to the transport company? What happened to the passengers? What happened afterwards? What has been on ground?
Definitely. I think the biggest takeaway from that experience, there was definitely a lot of uncertainty. We know that the border closed 16 months ago, and that was a decision to make sure that Nigeria and Nigerian interests were protected. There were concerns that smuggling was happening across the border, smuggling of food products, including rice, and also illegal substances like drugs and the like. So with that border closure coming down, it did reach a lot of people unexpectedly. So as you saw that coach, it had to stop at the border. The passengers had to return to the Nigerian side, regardless of whether or not they were Beninois or not. So that was a big hallmark of this closure, the fact that lots of people are going to be affected in their everyday lives. And in addition to that, even though we saw that the movement of people has fully reopened, there are still restrictions. If you are a local and you've been used to freely passing from Benin into Nigeria and vice versa, a lot of people are finding it a bit more difficult. As we saw in the report, it was only people who had formal identification who were allowed to formally pass. So then if you have goods that you may have brought over from Benin and you wanted to sell in Nigeria, it was a lot more difficult to do so. So I think that the biggest consensus that we experienced speaking to the people there was that it really isn't a reopening to them. In addition to that, they're still having to combat the restraints of corruption, the fact that many border officers will force them to make payments, something as little as 500 naira, which is less than or around about $1, at several checkpoints, up around 20 of them. So you can imagine if you're a trader, wholesale end, you brought in all of these goods that you want to bring to market. By the time you do reach the market, you would have paid so much to actually get there that it's very difficult to sell. And that was the experience that we felt and saw across the market. That poultry trader there, who was the only one left in his section, spoke at length about the fact that those rising costs, food inflation, corruption, all of them played a role in the fact that many people, many of his co-traders had to leave the market and find business elsewhere because it just wasn't profitable. So I think that when we look at the Seme border reopening, short term, we would like to think that it would result in some type of economic relief, but ultimately, with the people who are there, who are living there, it doesn't seem to be the case, and they are not so optimistic about the near future when it comes to business and their livelihoods in the short term.
And one can imagine, but Merry Christmas, Femi.
Oh, Merry Christmas, Adisa. Merry Christmas,
Let's talk about the stark difference at both ends. The Nigerian end and the Benin end. What did that feel like?
You know, they were actually very similar. And if you look, as you are approaching the Seme border point there, you are technically still in territorial Benin Republic. So for a lot of the time, we were actually technically in the Benin side, but honestly, there wasn't much difference in terms of the authority presence there. There was definitely a lot more Nigerian immigration service there, but also we did see port health authorities, and we saw Benin immigration services also working hand in hand within the same building, looking at the documents of each citizens from either side of the country. at first glance, there isn't a huge amount of difference. These are a lot of people who live within the same communities. We did see, rather, children who were coming back from school in their uniform from the Benin side of the border, crossing back over into Nigeria where they live. So it is quite lax in terms of the lives being lived across there. But if you look at commercial activity, especially if you're in the business of transporting people with a vehicle from one end to the other, that's where you're feeling a lot more restrictions. That's where you're feeling a lot more of a difference. So when you speak to those people, like the gentleman that you're seeing on the screen there, to him, this reopening really doesn't mean anything, because he is literally making his living from transporting people, whether it's from this heart of Lagos where we are now, or vice versa into Cotonou. The fact that he can't travel with his vehicle across the border is definitely going to put a downer on his means. And so for a lot of people, this reopening, even though it is open, isn't actually translating into operation or business as usual for many people there.
Well, when the borders were reopened a week ago, there was a lot of excitement. At this particular Seme border, we saw people jubilating. Is there an official explanation for the reluctance, for the failure to open the borders fully? Because it's not only Seme border that is the problem. It's the same thing at the Ilela border in Sokoto State, and I guess also in the Umfum border in the south-south. Were you able to get any kind of information as to what accounts for this? Because when the president gives a directive, we expect that it to be carried out immediately.
Exactly, and I'm glad you brought up that point. Absolutely. Last week when the first order did come down that the borders should reopen, people were very, very happy. And I think that it was a great thing that we got to go to the border a week later to see how life has changed. And ultimately, for a lot of people, it really, really hasn't. And it's very hard to find out what the official justification of that is. The fact that the border is open and people are allowed to travel 24 hours a day is fantastic. But however, in terms of economic activity, that's where things get a bit more tricky. It's only pedestrians at this point who are allowed to cross over and backwards. And when we spoke to Nigerian Immigration Services, they weren't very forthcoming with the reasons as to why vehicles, for example, weren't able to cross. One thing that they did talk to us about was that they did feel a lot of pressure for Nigeria to conform to or prepare to implement the Africa Free Trade Agreement. And so with the border closure, it was obviously very difficult for Nigeria to continue trading with its ECOWAS allies. So with this border reopening, even though as it stands now, it's not very open to commercial activity, for the movement of people at least, that is a good thing, or that is a positive that we're seeing. In terms of official explanations as to why a week later vehicles aren't allowed to travel, the fact that we did hear from a certain trader who said that he has business partners in Togo and in Ghana who, when they heard that the border was reopening, were excited and would make their way to the border from the Benin side and not be allowed entry without cause or without a huge amount of explanation, does put a bit of a downer on any type of jubilation people might have felt. This is, of course, Christmas Day, and a lot of people were thinking that with a week to go until Christmas, with the border reopening, this would mean a lot more money to hand, a lot more business activity, being able to recoup a lot of the losses that they would have lost since August 2019. Unfortunately, for a lot of people, that hasn't been the case, and it's very sad that we don't know why.
Femi, in that documentary, the poultry farmer you were talking about was talking about the increase in currency exchange. He was saying at some point it was 900 and now 1,000 naira. You know, I think that's supposed to be between the CFR and the Naira. Can you walk me through what that currency exchange modality now and how the border closure hiked up, forex rates in that area?
This is it. And he wasn't the only person who talked to us about the difference and the difficulties with the exchange rate between the Naira and the CFA, or the franc that is being spent over there in Francophone countries, most especially in Benin. And again, I think that adds to this already very difficult and volatile economic situation here. The fact that lots of people literally can't trade at a price that they're used to makes it very difficult for businesses to continue. You'll see that part of the market there was completely empty. He was the only person there. And right before our eyes, he was trying to sell some of his turkey to the woman that we saw there. And she just said that for that one piece, I think he was selling for around 1,500 naira, and she just couldn't afford it. I think that she was looking for a price close to 1,000, 1,100 naira. So you can imagine a lot of people are really struggling to first and foremost make ends meet if they are a business, if they're trying to sell goods so that they can continue operating. And then for people who are literally struggling to afford food to feed themselves and their families, this is another issue. So the exchange rate is another example of how this reopening hasn't translated into economic prosperity in the short term for a lot of people who are relying, who are desperate for that border to open. Lots of disappointment on either side of the border there.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Femi, I was going to ask you about the travel time to the border. I mean, a lot of people transact there, people live there. But what was the journey like for you, leaving the center of excellence in the heart of it in Ikoyi, where we are, to go to do that report? What was the experience like?
I think the most common route from where we are in Lagos to the border would be through the Lagos-Badagry Expressway. But because we were trying to avoid traffic, we went through Ogun State. So we went through lots of different villages. And I'm actually very glad that you asked me this question, Adesua, because the roads were very, very difficult to travel through. We went through a lot of villages in the Ogun State area, Owode, and areas like that. And once we did come in through, and we saw that, for example, if it rains and the muddy grounds wouldn't allow our vehicle to pass, we would have to go through more residential areas. And we would come across lots of different human roadblocks, people who wouldn't allow us entry, people who say that they've been abandoned by the government, abandoned by the local government. And so for us to come in with our vehicle all the way from Lagos, you will have to suffer the same roads that we have to suffer through. And so that definitely added to our journey time. It took us around 5-6 hours to reach Ikoyi to Seme. On our way back, however, even though there were lots of checkpoints, we did take the Lagos-Badagry Expressway. That was slightly shorter, around 4.5 to 5 hours. But all in all, we spent a lot of hours on the road on Wednesday trying to get to the border and then heading back over into Lagos.
Well, I'd like to ask you about that travel by road, because apart from the persons we call area boys who set up road blocks from one community to the other, you also ordinarily have security presence on that road. Either you go through Ogun State or you go straight from Badagry to Seme. And the concern is that there is too heavy a presence of all kinds of government agencies, from immigration to customs to other agencies, who are not necessarily providing security or doing their constitutional work, but extorting money. So did you have that kind of encounter with uniformed officials on the way? And then at the border itself, yes. In terms of COVID-19 protocols, what did you observe? Because you said persons were allowed to come in from this side or that side. From the Nigerian side, do you see the Nigerian officials at the border enforcing COVID-19 protocols at that land border?
Okay, I'll take the first part of the question where we are talking about, of course, the journey and the security officials that we would have encountered on our way there. The closer we got to the Seme border, that's when we saw a lot more security apparatus, and they were from lots of different fractions of Nigeria's security services. So we definitely saw lots of different types of police in different uniforms. And then the closer we got, then we would see more people in grey uniforms representing Nigerian customs. And then the closer and closer we got, we saw army presence, armed presence, and then the closest we got, that's when we started seeing the light brown uniforms of the Nigerian Immigration Service. So there were lots of checkpoints. Every single time that we reached a checkpoint, we were allowed to pass without any question, without any intervention. And that's obviously because we were traveling in a journalism, in the Arise official bus, which is clearly marked. But as I said, and as we heard in the report, lots of people say that crossing those borders, crossing those checkpoints means a lot of money that they have to pay. In addition to that, I know we're running out of time, but that in terms of our COVID-19 protocols, they are taking temperatures, they are handing out hand sanitizers. However, one question I wanted to ask, and I did ask, was that with where you have people stood outside in the heat and you're taking their temperature, should they record a higher temperature, what is your leeway? What is how do you gauge whether or not this is an alarming temperature? Usually around 38 degrees would be something that would set off alarm bells, and they weren't very forthcoming with their answers to that. COVID-19 protocols are being followed, but it's very hard to see how they're enforcing them with this border now being opened.
Thank you so much, Femi. Great report. Like the Italians will say, superior quality, very superior quality. Thank you so much for your good work all the time. Thank you. All right, for update on COVID-19 pandemic, Adesso Moro is here. Adesso, how are you?
Very well, thank you, Rufai. Let's go through Merry Christmas once again. Let's go through the global numbers. Like I said, from Jerusalem to Lagos to wherever, there's subdued scenes of, subdued scenes were repeated across the world, where festive family gatherings and normally packed prayers have now been scaled back or cancelled, thanks to this pandemic. Yesterday, 658,947 cases were reported, and 11,655 deaths also came in, bringing the total numbers to 79.3 million and 1.742 deaths. Let's go to America, where people are defying authorities and traveling for the festivities as the inoculation program continues in the U.S., but very slowly. In the U.S., the inoculation has started, as we know, but it's slower than planned. According to the CDC, just 1,008,025 shots had been administered as at Wednesday, and that's roughly 19 million doses shy of earlier projections for December. This leaves public officials a little more than a week, about 8 days, to try to close that gap. But the vaccinations have so far had little effect on the latest surge in cases spiraling in the U.S. Over 2,000 deaths were recorded yesterday. Another 167,000 cases came in from the U.S. yesterday alone. Now, officials agree that this is a brand new logistical challenge for them to distribute the vaccine and get it to the right place, and to do so while maintaining the integrity of the product. To India now, where the Indian Council of Medical Research, the ICMR, has said that the Indian vaccine against COVID-19 called Covaxin is drawing global attention. It's made this known in the tweet here. That's the tweet. It says Covaxin, which is a product of the ICMR and funded by the Bharat Biotech collaboration, achieved remarkable feats and data generated from within India, underlining impressive safety and immunogenicity profile of Covaxin, and sparks the Lancet's interest in publishing them. Well, going through the report, the second phase trial for this vaccine, they included children in their trials. This is something we have not seen in some of the approved vaccines globally. India is considering 8 vaccine candidates, including the Sputnik 5 for its citizens. But out of that 8, 4 are developed indigenously. That means 4 are being developed in India. And you will recall that the world's largest vaccine maker is actually in India. It's the Serum Institute of India. So India seems to have everything on track at the moment. And to Nigeria, Dr. Abati had talked a lot about this. The federal government here in Nigeria has imposed fresh requirements for travelers from the UK and South Africa. The PTF yesterday, this was made known. You recall that there's a new variant recorded in the UK and in South Africa as well. Starting from December 28th, which is Monday, travelers from both countries will now be subjected to extra travel requirements. There will be an open register at the airport where they must fill, and of course, with other requirements that they must have done through the travel portal, pay for their PCR test that should be taken 7 days after. And of course, the fines that will follow include visa ban and passport ban as well. So, yes, the penalties include passport or visa suspension for at least 6 months. The PTF also said the first 100 Nigerian passport numbers that will be suspended for 6 months will be published over the weekend. It is one thing to give directive. It is another thing for it to be carried out. So the port health authorities have been given directive that travelers from these 2 countries must be subjected to these extra requirements. We hope that they will carry that out, because that's the thing there.
Well, I hope in that regard, maybe the presidential task force or the federal government will go a step further. Because, in defining the sanctions, government was focusing on the fact that many of the travelers coming into the country have been irresponsible, and they flouted the guidelines. And they are also talking about PCR tests, fake PCR tests that are brought to the airport. And they want to empower the port health authorities and the airlines to make sure that that is detected. And when it is detected, the offending party is sanctioned. But the PTF has not yet looked at what was reported previously, which is the collusion, the corrupt practices of even the port health officials themselves, and also officials of the Ministry of Health. I hope that, they will go a step further to look at that angle of it about collusion. Secondly, as I said yesterday, I think the various state governors or state governments deserve commendation in terms of the restrictions that they have rolled out. People have been told that there should be no crossover services, either at Christmas or on December 31st. And the state governments too should see how they enforce this. And it was quite a great delight to see that the governor of Lagos, Babajide Sanwo-Olu, has been able to beat COVID. He has tested negative. And I saw one paper today talking about the return of Babajide Sanwo-Olu. As for India, yes, good news from India. And maybe there are things that Nigeria can learn from there. Nigeria is saying that we will roll out vaccines in the first quarter of 2021. Those vaccines are not vaccines made in Nigeria. Today, India can boast, even with the fact that they have about 10 million, over 10 million infection cases, over 145,000 deaths. They can boast that from their own Institute of Medical Research and laboratories, they've been able to develop 4 vaccines indigenously. The one you were talking about, Covaxin, was developed right there in India, and that's the major interest. And they say they have used what they call inactivated virus. It's based on an inactivated virus, which is slightly different from the mRNA used by biotech and Pfizer, and also by Moderna. But it compares favorably, they say, with Sinopharm, Sinovac, and the other vaccine developed by the Chinese Academy of Sciences. Both, of course, all of these require 2 doses, okay? And India has put infrastructure in place to be able to roll out in the first quarter of, in fact, in January.
Yes.
And, all of those, vaccine research centers, they have applied for emergency authorization. So you see, how research can help a country to respond to emergencies. That's the kind of lesson that we should be learning, which we have not paid enough attention to.
Dr. What is India? Like you said, Adeswa, the biggest, one of the biggest pharmaceutical countries in the world, one of the biggest producers of vaccines in the world. You can't compare. And the method they use, the attenuated virus method, that's the normal form, of creating vaccines. So you can either use new technologies. That's why what the Pfizer is using is a new technology. That's the messenger mRNA. The attenuated form is a reduced form of that virus to inject into you to be able to alert your immune system that this is it. But I'm not surprised India has done that. We too, we have got vaccine candidates in this country, but we don't have the money to develop it. That's what they said.
Well, I know the names of the vaccine candidates elsewhere.